And no, they probably wouldn't fly. But so at least right now, Sam, it looks like it's you and me, and Ashley will be on deep background. So you can see the handout.
Yeah, I just printed it.
Oh, okay, great. All right, so I printed it too. But I won't pull it up on my share screen if you can't access it that way anyway, and you don't need it. So here's this very strangely phrased verse. Right? The pig has true hoofs, but it does not chew the cud. So that, but what it says in the Hebrew, "L'hu lo yigar," which literally means it has a cud, it does not. So the rabbis, as you might imagine, have a good deal to say about this. Right? So, for instance, here's this piece from one of the 18th century commentators, the Or HaChaim, who says, in the time to come, in other words, he wants to give an explanation for why it says exactly what it says. When it says it has, it does not. So he says, in the time to come, the pig will again be permitted, not because the Torah will change, but because the pig will change and it will chew its cud. And that is the allusion in the text. It says it has a cud, it does not, as if it depends. When it does not, and this is wrong, this is a misprint. It says, as long as it does not chew its cud, it is not permitted. But when its nature changes, and it will do so, it will be permitted. Right? So this is how Or HaChaim nicely explains the fact that this verse says it is, it isn't, it does, it doesn't. Okay, does that make sense?
Oh, of course it does.
Well, I mean, to the extent that
my little brain can do. Yes, yes.
The verse itself makes sense. Right? Midrash from Sifra. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah taught, how do we know a person should not say, oh, I cannot bear to eat pork. I just hate the bacon. Or similarly, I cannot bear to commit a sexually immoral act. But rather they should say, I do desire it, but what can I do? God doesn't permit it. God has decreed these laws, and darn it, I have to follow them. Okay? So the answer in this midrash comes from another verse later on in Leviticus. It says, I have separated you from among the nations to be mine, meaning not to be just separated from the nations, but to be separated from sin, from transgression, and to accept the kingdom of heaven, meaning to accept God's rules. Okay? So, I'm sure that you know people who say, bacon? Terrible. I just can't stand the smell of it, right? But that's not really the attitude we're supposed to have. It's reasonable to want bacon. It's reasonable to want to do things that are not permitted. But that's the way it is. We're Jewish. We have certain laws that are given to us, and that's the way it is. Okay?
Sure. I personally cannot stand the smell of bacon. I don't think I've ever eaten it. Well, I know I haven't intentionally eaten it. I don't think I've accidentally eaten it either in other things, but the smell of it to me is terrible.
Yeah. You're not alone. Yeah, totally understandable. I don't feel that way because I didn't grow up observant. And bacon was a staple in our house. So were pork chops, by the way. So, I had to learn to set that stuff aside at a certain point.
One of the things that we were taught was that everything in related to keeping kosher was trying to push us to be vegetarians. I mean, my home was schizophrenic at the minimum, in a very good way, but very schizophrenic. And we were always taught that to really be observant of it, one would have to be almost a vegetarian.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are many sources that suggest that vegetarianism is the ideal. And then, in fact, in the first chapters of Genesis, you don't read about Adam and Eve being permitted to eat meat. You only see that after the flood. And it's permitted to Noah. It's like, it's a concession. But that's all. Meaning that the ideal would really be, and I'm just coming off of a meat meal. So what can I tell you? A concession to my own desires. Right? But, my wife is a vegetarian. So in that respect, she's a better Jew than I am.
If one holds that to be a necessary item.
Or even just to say that that's an ideal that I don't strive for.
We truly never did either.
Mm-hmm.
But I can remember being taught that in a number of different arenas.
Well, yeah, it's a big thing now. Okay? I see more and more vegan restaurants. Would never have imagined there would be so many vegan restaurants in Houston, Texas.
Right. Oh, yes.
Right? But if you look on happycow.net, you can see all the vegetarian restaurants and also veggie-friendly restaurants. And a ton of restaurants, including some new ones. One that just started since the pandemic. So it's interesting that this is maybe beginning to take hold with some people. Or maybe it's just that there are more people in the community now from cultures where vegetarianism is more common.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know. So.
I didn't mean to get us off track. I'm sorry.
No, you didn't. And by the way, I don't have a track. We have discussions. And since it's just you and me, Sam, we can talk about anything.
I've been here before and never been able to participate before because at that time, neither my audio nor my video worked. Now, at least I have the audio working.
Yes. All I see on my screen is this big orange.
Orange, yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Has nothing to do with Texas. That's just what the camera finds.
It's not burnt orange.
Correct. Well, actually it is.
Yeah?
Yeah.
It doesn't look like Longhorn orange.
It does on my screen.
Okay, well, I'm from Oklahoma, so it has no effect on me. All right, here's the next piece.
Okay.
So this is from Maimonides, right? It says, the first purpose of the law is to restrain desire. And he quotes the verse from Isaiah. They who sanctify and purify themselves to enter the groves, eating the flesh of the swine. He says, meaning he refers to Isaiah here, they purify and sanctify themselves in the open and public places. And afterwards, when alone in their homes, they are engaged in disobedience. That is, in their unbridled license in eating forbidden food. Now, today, for many people, it's just the opposite. In public, people eat whatever they want, but at home, they're more observant. That I think that's very interesting. And Dennis Prager once said to a person like that, he said, Mrs. Schwartz, your dishes will go to heaven.
You won't.
Yeah. So, here Maimonides, identifies the eating of pork with idolatry, and suggests that the purpose of the dietary laws is to help us develop some self-control. And certainly, I think that's one piece of the whole system of kashrut, that we train ourselves to say no to certain things. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Next. Right. So this is the piece from Second Maccabees. One of those stories, one of those horror stories that we were told growing up about the tyranny of Antiochus. Here was Eleazar, one of the leading teachers of the Torah, a very aged man, and was being forced to open his mouth and eat pork, but preferring an honorable death to an unclean life, he spat it out and voluntarily submitted to the flogging, and presumably was flogged to death. Now, in Jewish law today, that's not what he should have done. The law is there are certain things you're allowed to violate if your life is at stake. There are only 3 things that you're not allowed to do, even if your life is at stake. Right? One of them is murder. One of them is adultery. And the third is, public idolatry. But that's today. They didn't, maybe they didn't have that rule back then. Yeah. The next piece, which I took from this book by Rabbi Louis Jacobs, who was a 20th century English rabbi, who asked a question that's a little bit ahead of his time. Is kosher bacon kosher? Meaning, if it's manufactured to look and taste like bacon, but it's not, is it kosher? So he says it is no offense against the dietary laws. The meat itself is kosher. Whether it is desirable or not, that's something else. You can say, well, it's not, it doesn't look right for a Jew to eat something that resembles pork.
Right.
If kosher bacon is eaten, you should, there is a principle in Jewish law called marit ayin, meaning the way it looks.
Say that again. Excuse me. Say that again. Marit ayim.
Yes. Ayin means eye. Mara as the appearance. So
Okay.
there's this whole category of law about how do certain things look. Right? So for instance, I might walk to a movie theater on Saturday. I might have purchased my ticket the day before, right? But how does it look? It looks like I'm breaking Shabbos.
Yeah.
And so Marit Ayin would say, technically it might be okay, but you really shouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing here for kosher bacon. If it looks like bacon and people are going to think that it's bacon, then you shouldn't eat it even if it's absolutely kosher. Okay? It's wrong to give the impression of wrongdoing, even though one is innocent of it. So that category of Marit Ayin is something that comes into play on quite a wide variety of issues. Mm-hmm. So, all of these texts so far actually have to do with the question, what is the purpose of keeping kosher? So tell me, Sam, what were you taught was the purpose of keeping kosher?
Oh, shoot.
Wasn't that long ago.
Well, yeah. It was 60 years ago. It's hard to describe what I was taught. Like I said, I grew up in a culture that was rather schizophrenic.
Mm-hmm.
And
you're a baby boomer, right?
yeah, technically born right after the war.
So, me too. So I can tell you that what I was told was all over the map. Right?
Okay.
And I was told it's a form of discipline. It's, it's just the Jewish thing. And a little later on, I was told this is one of those specific Jewish laws that trains us to say no. So later on, I learned that there are 4 different kinds of Jewish laws, and kashrut is one of the few sets of rules that fits into all 4 categories. In other words, many laws fit into more than one category, but kashrut fits into all 4. So I'll tell you what the 4 categories are, right? The first category is ethical laws, right? Very simple. Okay. Don't steal, don't murder, and don't cause pain to animals. So we know how that fits in with kashrut, right?
Right.
Yeah. Second type of law is national laws. Laws that are part of the practice of the Jewish people. So for instance, Passover is a national Jewish holiday. It celebrates the Jewish people's exodus from Egypt. It has other aspects too.
Sure.
But it's definitely a national holiday. And also as we're bringing back a lot of Jews who may not have done a whole lot else the rest of the year, but they go to a Seder. Okay? Why is it a national law? Because kashrut being a set of Jewish rules brings Jews together. If you observe kashrut, you are less likely to socialize with non-Jews and less likely to marry a non-Jew, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, so
Didn't work in my family, but I could agree with that.
Understood. So, yeah, and nothing is foolproof, right?
Of course.
Particularly today. But, in times when Jews, you couldn't just go to the grocery store,
Mhm.
If you wanted something to eat, you went to a Jewish home or to a Jewish kitchen.
Right.
Okay? And you socialized with other Jews who were there.
Right.
Okay? Third kind of law is reflexive laws. Prayer is a good example of that. Prayer is not just crying out to God, but it's also, we reflect on certain things. And because we bring them up in prayer, we also have to think about, where we're at in relation to that. So, for instance, if I pray for healing for someone, I also have to be thinking about, what am I doing besides praying for this person, right? Do I need to go visit that person? Do I need to call that person? Do I need to check in with the family and see what's going on, right? So there are a whole lot of Jewish laws that are reflexive, right? Kashrut fits into this because it makes you reflect about what you're eating, what you're not allowed to eat, and was this food prepared in a certain way? Was this animal caused unnecessary pain,
Right.
etc.
Right.
Okay? So that's the third kind. And then there's the fourth kind, which is laws of holiness. Laws of holiness are the things that, just like, God is set apart, God is holy because God is set apart from human beings. We are holy because we're set apart from animals, right? Now, ethically, if I were to come into breakfast one morning, pour my milk onto my cereal, and dip my face into the bowl to eat the cereal, is there anything ethically wrong with that? I don't know. I don't, it doesn't seem to hurt anybody. But if I did that in your kitchen, what would you say to me?
Hello. May I offer you a spoon? Yeah.
If a kid said that, if a kid did that in your kitchen, you'd say, don't eat like an animal.
Yeah.
Right?
True.
So we can make choices that animals cannot make.
Right.
We can decide, I could eat this, other people will eat this, but I won't. And in that respect, we set ourselves apart from the animals. Right? So
Right.
kashrut is also a law of holiness. So kashrut really fits all four of those categories. I don't have any other categories. I've never been able to think of anything that didn't fit into those four.
Interesting. Yeah, I've never heard that kind of explanation. It was much more pragmatic. And it was, because it was in the Torah and we were taught to do it and we did it and that was it.
Right. You do it because.
Yes.
Which, that's fine when you're a kid. When you're having your own home and you make your own life and your own rules, it's not usually sufficient.
Right. The decision one has to make and a commitment one has to make to keep a kosher home.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so anyway, for most people, I think, there are an awful lot of Jews today that were taught kashrut the way you were taught kashrut.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we do, and they weren't concerned with any of these rationales. They weren't shown, for sure, they weren't shown any of these texts.
Right.
Just, to teach obedience, God could have given a whole different set of laws. If, there are suggestions that certain animals are prohibited because they're carnivorous or because they have certain other qualities. But, we're not totally sure about that. And maybe Maimonides is right, that there was something, at least in ancient times, that was inherently idolatrous about, was associated with pigs. And for some people, it's like the text from Maccabees. It's enough to know that Jews died rather than eat it.
Mm-hmm.
So if they died, rather than eat it, the least I can do is not press. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's it's an interesting challenge that we're given to understand what the rules really are and why they're given and what purpose they serve. Okay, let me just show you one more text here. This piece from the Midrash Vayikra Rabbah. And I'll shorten this up a little bit because I want to get to the main point. It says there are 4 kinds of land animals that are not kosher because they don't have the right qualifications.
Right.
Those 2 qualifications. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman taught all the prophets foresaw the kingdoms who would subjugate Israel. And they looked at this verse that said the garden flowed into 4 streams, right? And the 4 streams represented 4 different nations. It was separated into 4 streams, suggesting that these were nations that separated us from our land and from each other. Mm-hmm. And the 4 kingdoms that enslaved us were the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And Rome was also referred to in the rabbinic tradition as Edom. Right? They needed a word that referred to outsiders, but they couldn't refer to Rome like that in public. So they called it Edom. Right? And they say Edom is compared to the pig. Why? The pig wallows on its back, wallows in the mud, and it lifts up its hooves as if to show you, look, I'm kosher, I'm good, right? Because it has split hooves. But it doesn't chew its cud, so it's not kosher, right? So also, this evil empire, meaning Rome, acts arrogantly, raiding and pillaging while presenting itself as just, right? And it's interesting to note that all of these different civilizations and certainly this was true of Egypt as well. All these civilizations were supposed to be very advanced. But when we Jews think about ancient Egypt, we don't think about the mathematics and the building of the pyramids and the other architecture and so forth, the great advances, which, I mean, some of them are amazing. You look at how the pyramids were built. Nobody understands how they knew how to put together the pyramids the way they did, how they got those incredibly heavy stones to the top of the pyramid. Right? Nobody knows that. And if they tell you they know it, they're probably lying, right? So, but that's not the way we Jews think about Egypt. When we think about Egypt, we think of the place of slavery, right?
Right.
Egypt, and actually Egypt was like the place of the first Holocaust against the Jewish people. Because how many people were slaughtered in slavery before they became free? So, very often the most advanced civilizations are not, and certainly, I mean, it was true Nazi Germany, which, Germany claimed to be this, highly educated society with, great literature and great art, and also they knew how to kill. That was what they were best at. So it gives us a different way of evaluating civilizations. We see the raiding and the pillaging more than what their accomplishments really were.
Sure.
Okay. Any questions for you, Sam?
I guess one of the things that I never quite understood was the distinction of the birds and fowl that we could eat or not eat. And yes. I mean, I had read it and studied it in school and discussed it when we were in high school, but it was like, it still didn't make any sense. I mean, there were some things like the fish having to have the have scales and no shellfish and because it didn't have scales.
Fins and scales.
Thank you, fins. The word didn't come to me brain. Fins and scales. They weren't bottom feeders.
Right.
And that, I guess.
And the birds are not, the permitted birds are not birds of prey.
And that that never did make any sense to me. And I understand it and accept it. I don't go off eating some of those weird things anyway, but it just, there were some distinctions that just really didn't make sense. And even the shellfish, the fins and scales didn't make any sense to me. It was just something that we were taught and we accepted, and we didn't have shellfish at home. But it was like, the birds of prey, big deal. What, it never did quite understand that. I read it and I know that it was, they didn't eat other animals and so therefore they were cleaner and, et cetera. But I don't know, there was still some things
Yeah, so I think that the idea behind it, which obviously it doesn't work for everybody, but the idea was to teach us that we also should not prey on those that are lesser.
Okay.
I don't, I heard that when I was young. I don't really think I got the ethical message that was intended. I also came to terms with the fact that there are some laws that they might have a rational basis, but for me, they didn't seem rational.
Mhm.
They didn't have a rational role in my own observance. I was, but I was prepared to say, this is part of a system. And thousands of years went into making this system.
Truly.
One of the, one of these laws, I don't necessarily see what's so rational about it. But if I look at the system as a whole, I see that I understand the rational basis for maybe 90% of the laws. Okay? And I'm willing to say that I will trust God for the other 10%.
Yes, I can understand that.
And that is also something that is important when it comes to thinking about God and theology in general, right? Because I think that Judaism does a great job of answering most of the big questions of life, right? I would say probably I feel very satisfied with 80% of the answers that Judaism provides. I'm willing to trust God for the other 20%, for the things that I don't understand why they happen. And in fact, later on, sometimes I did understand. I did come to explanations that made sense for me, which I might not have appreciated them 40 years ago, but I did later on. So for instance, why is there evil? Right? That's the biggie that everybody wants to know.
Right.
And in a certain sense, you can't answer that because we don't have the whole picture. That's the point of the book of Job. We don't get to see and know everything there is in its context. But out of my study of Kabbalah, I understood an answer that many of us don't get. But I got it because I learned it through Kabbalah. And that is that in much of life, there are certain things you have to have, but you also have to have them in the right balance. If you bake a cake, you're going to have baking powder, you're going to have salt, you're going to have sugar, you're going to have flour and other ingredients, and you mix them up, but they have to be in the right proportions.
Right.
God forbid you put the wrong proportions in. Your cake is not going to get great reviews.
Right.
Right? So I think, and this is not just what I think, but it really comes out of the Kabbalistic view of life that there is a balance between love and judgment, or what I would call as boundaries, rules, right? If you raise a child with only love, what's going to happen?
Well, if you define love as not including discipline,
right,
you could have a little bit of chaos there.
You'll have chaos, and I liken it to the 1960s. There was a lot of free love going around.
Oh, Haight-Ashbury was wonderful.
And a few diseases too, but aside from that, free love, right? But no rules. And a lot of problems consequently. Right? And what happens if you raise someone with an excess of rules and not enough love? Right? So I think there are two big possibilities. One is, you know, you're going to have a rebel on your hands one day.
Right.
And the other possibility is you'll train a little fascist. Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Evil comes into the world because there are things that we have to have in the world. But if we don't use them in the right proportions, then we're gonna have problems. We have to have free choice, right? We don't have free choice, then we're just robots. We're not human beings. But what happens if we don't use it wisely? And bad things happen.
Surely.
Is God to blame if I make a bad choice and I walk out in traffic and I get hit by a car? Poo, 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 right? But it happens. People make those kinds of bad decisions every day.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And it's terrible, but it's not God's fault. You have cars, you have highways, and you have legs. And you have to manage how you navigate all that. All right, with that, I'm going to let you go. And unless you have other questions you want me to address, but I think that's enough for one night.
I enjoyed it though. Thank you
Good.
very much. I would not have been offended if you had had to shut it down because lack of participation, but I'm glad you didn't.
Well, sometimes it's an opportunity.
I enjoyed it very much.
Good.
So
Have
thank
a
you.
great evening.
You too.
Yeah, bye.